Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. Gosh, this is familiar, coming up to a stage like this and having these lights in my eyeballs and seeing so many familiar faces. And I don't want to keep doing it. So, anyhow, I hope that we don't have to keep having the conference over and over and over for another 20 years. But I'm going to get started. This is an opinion piece. And it's a captive audience, especially I had folks put spike strips down on the threshold, so especially any of our wheelies that try to escape out of here. I'm going to start this off with, I'm Jason Stoffer. I work with Unite to Fight Paralysis, advocacy manager there. I changed this, so the section of this was called How Do We Get There Together? And I'm not very creative, so I just restructured the title. How do we get there? Well, the answer's right there. It's together. Let me see if... Okay, let's start with a little background, a little story, because everyone loves stories. 2019 was the first of these symposiums that I went to. I was pretty fresh off my injury, 2 years out at that point. And I'd heard about this organization who kind of cared about pushing this work forward. And at that point, it was the only one that I was aware of. So I got here in a similar circumstance, and I looked around at all the faces, and I saw all the logos. I couldn't get over the number of logos. There's like hundreds of like foundations and projects and centers and all of these things. And I was like, well, this is amazing. I'm sure that all of these folks are working on a unified front to find answers. And then I found out that that's not necessarily the case. So to my dismay, and here's the thing, guys, as a disclosure here, or not disclosure, that's a fancy word. That's something I want you to know. I'm going to step back from my role with Unite to Fight Paralysis in this talk, so that I can talk from my community, not thinking about our organization among all the other organizations. I found that reality about a unified front is not really the case. I found that the community is complicated. I found out that we've persisted so long without answers that I think that we've dug in for the long haul. As individuals and as advocacy organizations, I think we get distracted. I think as individuals living with spinal cord injury, we move on from the hope of recovery to pursue what's left. I think as organizations, we begin to exist for the sake of our organizations. I think we begin to exist for the sake of our programs and our initiatives. I think we actually compete against each other, which is wild, for resources, for an audience, for an ear. I think this stuff comes from a position of scarcity, a scarcity mindset that there's only so much out there. So if you doubt this, you can go down the rabbit hole on any like social media platform, find a post of an advocacy organization's success, and you'll find a number of folks within our own community that take out the knives and talk about where that money should have gone into their cause or whatever it is. As a community, I think we are disorganized. I think we are quiet. And I think that we lack urgency. But that's the kind of like darkish part. I think the hope part is that I'm seeing something really hopeful these days. I'm seeing a new paradigm of advocates that you guys see among you here. I see the possibility of our leading organizations becoming more than distant allies, but actually hunting down solutions across the needs of our community. This could be a renaissance, a merging of those organizations. Len, I don't know if you're still here, but man, that was encouraging to hear about what happened in the 80s and 90s, you said that the organizations started to merge. Let's talk about a new future, or the there that we're trying to get to. All right, so imagine all the people, imagine a future There's a future where the common cold doesn't loom as a death sentence for those of us with paralyzed diaphragms. The literal grasp and dexterity could open the literal and metaphorical door to independence, where the ability to urinate doesn't come with the cost of chronic UTIs, where your cue to shift your weight in your chair to prevent decubitus ulcers isn't from a 20-minute alarm, but it's because you have sensation in your backside. I also see a place where we have a renewed sense of urgency to get to this place faster. But while that's being worked out, I also see a there where our disability tax, right, which is this loss of our margin in our lives, in our days, in our finances, compared to our able-bodied friends, is lowered. And where every day doesn't have to be a constant advocacy to gain access to what the rest of the world takes for granted. You can get a rental car that has controls in it, Gwen, and we don't have to fight that fight, right? You can have safe, predictable air travel, Elizabeth, as we were just talking about. You can have access to basic health services, rehabilitation, access to wild places that lay behind locked gates, where 70% of our population doesn't have to wonder if they will ever have access again to gainful employment. All right, I think we're going to get there with a new kind of advocate. So first I want to start with the strength of this community. This is going to sound hyperbolic, but I mean this. I've never witnessed so much potential to move mountains than within this lived experience community. We are strong and resilient, not because we want to be, but because we have to be. We are survivors. We have a common bond that's born out of shared trauma and a loss and recreating our own worlds again. We are master adapters. We are creative problem solvers because that's how we've had to get through each and every day. By the way, researchers, that's also what makes us really good in your labs. So we have a lot of grievances, though. Again, social media. You could spend 10 minutes on there, and except for a few anomalies, you're going to find that our earning potential is lowered. We can't afford physical therapy or durable medical equipment like catheters. We can't afford to recreate. We're hospitalized for the dumbest of things, like skin breakdown and UTIs and autonomic dysreflexia. We can't find a damn parking lot or parking space because somebody did a fair that day and they put a tent up, in our spot, or the Amazon truck driver is just going to be there for a second. Sometimes these grievances tend to have us committing each other to like one cause or another. I want health care. I want disability rights. I want the world to be accessible. I want a cure. I think there are some historical baggage that's fostered this competition in these causes, but like, what if those grievances were organized into an actual unified voice? What if the disability rights crowd mingled with the adaptive rec crowd? What if the rehabilitation gym rat crowd mingled with the functional recovery research crowd? What if we said, you know what, that's not my passion, it's not my thing, it's not what I know, but I see the importance for our community at large, so how can I help? That's the crowd that I'm seeing emerge and that I have hope for. This generation is blurring the line between care and cure. They are calling it out for the false dichotomy that it is. This generation calls their members of Congress on Monday to preserve Section 504. On Tuesday, to save SCIRP. On Wednesday, they're posting about airline travel. And on the weekend, they're downhill skiing and they're building PVC wheelchairs. Exactly. These advocates are balancing the necessary frustration that fuels their advocacy with the imperative that we must pursue rich lives. They can be summarized into this motto: one team, one fight. All right, let's move on from our advocates to our organizations. You guys, it's time to merge again. Like Lynn said in the 80s and 90s, I see a renaissance. At this Neuromodulation for SEI conference about a week ago, I sat up in a place like this talking to folks like you, and I pointed fingers and I said, hey, research community, what are you guys doing to work together? What are you guys doing to collaborate, to coordinate your efforts towards some kind of outcome? And then, of course, you get to the question and answer session, and there was a researcher that turned the mirror back to us. And they said, what are you as advocacy organizations doing to work together, to collaborate with each other? How are you coordinating? So to our advocacy organizations and foundations, we have to do this together. We have to organize, we have to offer a cohesive platform for this new generation of advocates to speak from. We need to support each other to amplify their voices because they're ready. We're ready as a community to do something. One of us can't do it all effectively. We need to identify the players in our community, both large and small. We need to identify our organizational personalities. What are our strengths? Where do our strengths intersect? If our missions and personalities are so similar, do we consider consolidating? We need to find the balance between the diversity, creativity, and novel approaches that are the strength of silos. And we need to balance that with the availability of resources, coordination, and impact. Those are the strengths of collaboration. So we can say that same sentence that those advocates have to say, right? Or should say. It might not be my organization's passion or what we know or what we believe is important, but how can we help you? This merging renaissance need not be official. I want to drive this one home. We need not organize yet again another stinking organization with another name on top of it. This change can be as simple as showing up to the table with each other once a month, 2 times a month, whatever it is, where we simply talk to each other and we build trust, and we build relationships with each other, and we move forward together. All right, so how do we move that from organizations to an organism? I kind of think that's how we do it, but I also think we need a project. Now, you guys just heard from Rachel that just talked about Alzheimer's. She said something there that was really important. She mentioned this thing called a national plan. Now, you guys have seen all the plans we've had. My friend Naomi, actually, we've talked about this kind of stuff back and forth. She says, I'm tired of plans. We need to do something. We know what to do. The plans are there, guys. It's this, spinal cord injury priorities, whatever it was called back in 2005. And then yet again, SCI 2020, Decade of Disruption. Guys, we know what to do. We've identified it time and time and time again. We just need to do something about it. So, we've heard across the spectrum today of people talking about access to healthcare, extended rehabilitation. What if there was a plan that actually answered those things, right? And what if it had teeth? What if it was put into law? What if it offered resources for these things and coordination and set priorities? I'm just going to drop that little idea right here. But I know there's a danger of dropping it into the community. It's something I've seen time and time again. Those of us speak from here and we offer something to you, and then you guys offer something back to us, and then we ping pong this ball across. We should maybe do this, So I am fearful to just drop it in front of everybody to say maybe we should organize for a national plan, but I think we should. Don't know what that looks like. I need to go chat with Rachel, but you guys, that's all I have. So thanks for letting me sit up here and just ramble at you.
Thanks, Jason. David. So please welcome David Darrow. And just briefly, why David was invited and asked in part is we both are in Minneapolis, and David has been a partner in Minnesota, both through the Minnesota SCI TBI Research Grant Program, which we passed back in 2015. That's where we began to become familiar with David, but in the community more broadly, and at U2FP. And for example, we're very close to setting the first data set to the SEI ODC for human clinical neuromodulation studies. Long time work and effort that is very close to culmination, which is one of those small pieces, but it requires the kind of partnership that we have cultivated and developed. So that's why I wanted David to be a part of the conversation. Welcome.
Thank you. Matthew has a long agenda for me, so he said I could have 30 minutes. So first, I'll say I'm an MD. I have a weird job. I'm very privileged. I run 2 labs, and I mostly do research. I still do surgeries, but I'm an example of, sort of the intersection of, when MDs can drive, and I like driving. I will say that one perspective I've heard, during the conference is, the problem with translation. And it is a problem, but I will say that a lot of us think about it a lot. Every year, I probably pitch to 5 different companies, not always the same, about moving neuromodulation to a phase 3 study. And it's interesting because when I write to NIH to get a study funded, the perspective is that this is an area where industry would benefit, so industry should fund the study. And when I go to industry, it's the opposite, in that we're not going to make a lot of money here. So I spend my time, nights, weekends, with them, slowly wearing them down, because that's really what it takes. And I was talking earlier, and it seems like maybe that's a strategy that is going to work, one day. But there are a lot of people thinking about it, and also we're not alone in SCI. There are many people like me who work on multiple things with the entire idea that bridging between communities is extremely important to make, progress, because we can borrow from other fields and really push the envelope. So with that in mind, I want to talk just a little bit today about a thread that comes from the chronic pain world that I also work in, and just sort of tease where, these relationships can be beneficial and tell us something that we didn't really understand about SCI. I get research funding, and I do consult for various companies. I am talking about an off-label use of a medical device today. I am the PI of the eSTAND study that we originally designed back in 2016 to test the effect of spinal cord stimulation, invasive spinal cord stimulation, on motor function and autonomic function. And we're sort of wrapping up that study, as I'll mention towards the end. But it's a lot of people that have worked on this. So I represent a lot of people that we work with. And I'll just get right into it. So here's a patient who is an AISA, far out from injury, flaccid paralysis. And I'm showing you me programming, and all I'm doing is changing one thing, which is the frequency of stimulation, 20 hertz, 50 hertz. And the effects that just a single parameter has on function can be very dramatic. This is all in the same session. We're just repeating the same exact thing, asking her. Now, she doesn't have any sensation. She's AJA, but she has this movement from this tonic stimulation. It's just on. There's no triggering the stim, nothing. It's not spatiotemporal stim. It's just on. And she's able to do that, which is exciting, but it also shows you, maybe that this problem is a little bit difficult in terms of how we tailor exactly what's going on. And so when we're personalizing stimulation, we think about it in a few different ways. But one way to think about it is, how do we stimulate, where do we stimulate, and then how do you adjust that stimulation as the nervous system adapts? And so, how do we stimulate? That's sort of what we've worked on, is when you're comparing the frequencies and the pulse widths and you're optimizing per person, how do you create algorithms and use engineering and things like that to put that all together? And that's pretty straightforward. There are super smart engineers who can figure that stuff out and get it done. And they do. And so, across patients, you can see there's a lot of heterogeneity, because there is a lot of heterogeneity. And you can model them sort of, all in the same population, and you can see that some people are more similar to each other, and you can learn a lot about what's going on. But at the end of the day, we can get it done. And then you can compare, like, maybe if we just kind of use an average setting, maybe that'll work just fine. And it works okay, but, essentially every single patient benefits from having their own model built for them when compared to just a random or an average setting. So one opportunity that's come up is this idea of measuring evoked compound action potentials. And the idea is pretty simple. When you're stimulating the back of the spinal cord, the dorsal columns, these are all the neurons that are going from your skin and your bones and your muscles all the way up to your brain, and they're telling your brain what you're feeling and how you're feeling and where your limbs are. And when you stimulate them, remember these are neurons, so they're always active, and if you stimulate one, it sends a pulse up to your brain, but it also sends a pulse back down to where the cell bodies are. And the cell bodies are in your spine, but they're kind of off to the side. And so when you do a stimulation pulse in the spinal cord, you see that ripple travel towards the brain, like a ripple in a pond. And then you can say, okay, that ripple, and you can ask the patient, was that stimulation good? And they say, yeah, that was right on it. Or no, that was a little bit too soft, or that's too strong. And then you can turn it down, and then you can remeasure the ripple. And then you can say, okay, just like if you had cruise control, keep it there. No matter what, change it and make sure that the ripple always stays this size. That's all these evoked compound action potentials are. That's it. It's just a control signal to allow us to modulate the stimulation. And what we've seen in pain is that, sure enough, like, stimulation is complicated because every time you move your back and your spinal, every position is different, and it's moving all the time. And when you lay down and sit up, everything's changing. So this kind of fixes that problem. And so it helps us with figuring out how to adapt. The question is, are these really useful for SCI? Is it just like, keeping that stimulation in the right range or not? And so in our group, during surgeries that we do for E-stand, we test out these evoked compound action potentials. This is what the paddle looks like, and we measure all the muscles while people are asleep. And we compare how these ripples look like at different frequencies of stimulation and at different amplitudes. And this is kind of what those ripples look like. You can see each one of those contacts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8, on the paddle down at the bottom, and it's showing you where I'm measuring. And you can see as we ramp up the amplitude of stimulation from low to high, you see that the waveform gets bigger, and it changes in shape a little bit, but that's what we're measuring. We're measuring these amplitudes. These are really fast ripples. This is within 1 to 2 milliseconds of the stimulation pulse. Well, as you increase the frequency of these ripples and the stimulation in patients who have pain, one thing that is very interesting is that the size of the ripple gets smaller, which is kind of weird because you're doing the same, you're putting in more energy into the system, but the ripples get smaller, these ECAPs get smaller, but patients tell us that actually the stim feels stronger, and that's what the graph on the right is showing. That's the patient report for how much stronger it is compared with when it started. And so you have this kind of paradox where the stimulation is actually more energetic, but patients are reporting they're reporting that it feels stronger, whereas on the motor side, it's a little bit different. So this is sort of what the ECAPs look like as we increase the frequency from 2 hertz, so 2 times per second, to 12 times per second, to 38 times per second, to 72 times per second. And what we see is that the size of that ripple actually decreases. And we end up with this weird paradox. The size of the ripple is decreasing, but the amount of energy we're putting into the system is actually more. And if you look at how the growth of the size of those ripples are with amplitude over time, amplitude is on the x-axis, so we're just increasing the strength, versus the different colors, which are those different frequencies, we start to see a pattern emerge, and this is kind of an ideal one of those plots, and it shows that at 2 hertz, the ripples are biggest, and at 12 hertz, they're smaller, and at 38 hertz, they're even smaller, and they just get a little bit smaller. And so what this is telling us is that every time a pulse comes through, it's stimulating less and less of those neurons that are in the spinal cord. And sure enough, that seems to match with what we're seeing on the motor side, not so much on the sensory side. Sensory side, people are saying, I'm feeling more, not less. And so when we look on the motor side, here is a graph showing the percentage of muscles that we recruit based on those different frequencies. And those are the muscles that we're recording during the surgery. And it shows that, generally speaking, we see a similar kind of pattern emerge where the higher frequencies recruit less muscles and the lower frequencies recruit more muscles. So this is across a handful of patients showing the recruitment curves of the number of muscles as we increase the intensity from 0 to 10. This is another way to visualize it per participant, but really just shows sort of similar findings. So when we look at those recruitment curves and we add those motor thresholds, meaning when we turn up the stimulation enough, we start seeing motor activity, those recruitment of the muscles. When we add the motor thresholds and we kind of look at the idealized version for, in this case, I think it's the gastrocnemius. This graph is a little complicated, but what I'm showing is that if you follow the dark blue, the 2 hertz stimulation, I think didn't go with it, but the 2 hertz stimulation is the dark blue. And when it crosses that 80 threshold, that's really when we start to see their motor activity. And when we go to 12 hertz, instead of, and you see that the blue, it crosses that motor threshold at 1.5 milliamps or so. But when we go to the next frequency, 12 hertz, it doesn't reach the motor threshold until 2 milliamps. But the thing that's unifying about it is that the ECAP amplitude is on the y-axis, and that's the same. And so it brings about this theory that maybe actually this idea that we've developed for chronic pain, this idea of the ripple, measuring the ripples and using the ripples to modulate therapy, it actually relates more to the motor side than it does to the sensory side, which for spinal cord injury is a real boon because it allows us to test this thousands of times per minute, per hour, and be able to modulate the therapy and tune into your body all day long, every day, and be able to respond accordingly. And it's complicated because we have more than just one muscle in our legs and in our arms. There's way more than just the gastrocnemius. But it brings about sort of a new era where something that was developed in a completely different area on a commercial product is now available for us to be able to use on the spinal cord injury side and try to advance therapy for something that we haven't yet gotten to work, which is how to adjust it all day long, every day, and really make it personalized to you. So in summary, what we're seeing is that as we increase the frequency and we look at the frequency encoding, the sensation increases, but there's decreased muscle activation. When the muscles are activated, that amplitude of that signal that we're measuring inside your body explains that motor threshold better than the amplitude of stimulation. And maybe ECAPS is going to tell us about what's actually going on with stimulation, because that fits with a theory that is a little bit different than what some people have thought. It tells us that we're actually reaching a sort of threshold of synchrony that allows us to pass from the dorsal side, or the side where there's just sensation, to the motor side of the spinal cord where we're actually activating motor function. And that's telling us mechanistically that this lines up with some of the animal work that other people are doing. And this is all just from us testing one little experiment when people are sleeping for 10 minutes. So it's sort of a new way of looking at it, and potentially a new tool that we can use to accelerate things even faster and make it work better in the long run. So we have a new trial that's starting this year that is a small trial where we're really going to hone in on this idea of mapping extensively per person spatially so we can get really good results with spinal cord stimulation for paralysis. It tells us potentially more about mechanism and what's going on, and we're developing sort of a new technique where we can do this for all muscles at the same time. So we're excited to see where that will go. So if you have any questions, please reach out. And lastly, if you know anybody that is interested in participating in a study like that's invasive, who has thoracic injury basically, please tell them about eSTAND, and we're recruiting the last few patients this year so we can close out the study. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Adrien, come on up. So please welcome Adrien Cohen, coming here from London. And just again, a little background. Adrien's brother had a spinal cord injury some time ago, but Adrien has a very unique set of skills. I won't do that.
Very unique skills, you said.
Unique set of skills.
Wow.
Particularly in startup, biotech, venture capital. And so Adrien brings a novel idea and approach that's been really critically necessary for our field for some time.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Matthew, for setting the expectations properly. Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk about a new initiative, SEI Ventures, which is the first venture fund dedicated to paralysis. A little bit of background on how I ended up launching and managing this initiative. I am not coming from the field of neuroscience. I'm a tech entrepreneur, but my brother had a bad accident a few years ago, broke his back, ended up paralyzed from the waist down. And obviously that was a big shock. And I did at the time what many families in this room did. I first did just tried to stay around and be supportive. And then I started looking for options. I started calling scientists in the US, in Europe, in Asia. And really I was just trying to understand the lay of the land. I was trying to understand what was out there, what sort of hope there was for, I won't even say a cure, but some level of functional recovery. After calling maybe 50 scientists, teams, everywhere, I must say I got extremely frustrated, very, very disillusioned. I felt like on the one hand, just to be a little bit more positive, I felt very excited by the type of innovation and science I was seeing. There's clearly an acceleration of technology that will benefit people living with a spinal cord injury. We read every day about the progress of AI, drug repurposing, neural interfaces, cell reprogramming. So this held a lot of promise in my eyes, especially as a tech entrepreneur. But on the other hand, it was very clear to me that there was zero path, zero vehicle to take this innovation from the lab and bring it to the real world, bring it to people living with a spinal cord injury, my brother and 20 million people worldwide. And that's the role of venture capital. Venture capital is supposed to take a risk on early stage innovation and to nudge it to the clinic where bigger investors and industry pharma can take over. But without this piece of the puzzle, innovation dies or stays in the lab and never translates. And so that's why I decided to create this fund. So Spinal, SEI Ventures, the vision, the approach is very simple. We want to take the best innovation, invest in it, and bring it to the clinic. So we do only mission-driven investment. We invest in the most promising neurotech, biotech. Number one. Number two, we want to play the role of a catalyst. And I think that's probably the most important piece or characteristic of the vehicle. And I will talk about it a bit more in the next few slides. But the idea is that we alone are not sufficient to bring cures and therapeutic options. We need to engage much more resources. We need to engage billions, not millions. And so how do we do that? How do we activate an investment market? That's the second piece. And the third piece is we take a long-term horizon. The vehicle operates like a traditional venture fund, but it is philanthropic. It's evergreen in its structure, which means that 100% of the profits we make, we keep in the vehicle. We do not distribute it. We reinvest it into more companies until we get to a biological repair of the spinal cord. We initiated the model with the Christopher Reeve Foundation. The Reeve Foundation actually pioneered this model way before I got, unfortunately welcomed to the field of SEI with an investment in 2016, a $5 million investment in a company that became Onward Medical. And so in 6 or 7 years, this $5 million investment that was made by the Reeve Foundation turned out to become a company that raised more than 200 million and that delivered the first FDA-approved therapy for people living with chronic SCI. And to me, that was a clear illustration of the power of VC to accelerate innovation. And so when we sat with the Re Foundation, we discussed how we could industrialize this approach, not just one company, but 20 companies like Onward. And the answer is this vehicle, SEI Ventures. We also discussed that we needed much more collaboration and that we needed one vehicle globally to make an actual difference in the field. The worst would have been to see a fragmented space, multiple very small funds trying to do a bit the same thing in Europe, in the UK, and the US. And so we agreed to make this initiative global, and we agreed to reach out to other institutions to co-found the initiative alongside the Re Foundation. And we reached out to Wings for Life, Shepherd, Spinal Research, Promobilia, and in a few months, all those institutions in the US, in the UK, in Europe, came together behind this vehicle. And when I say they have skin in the game, they actually do. They all put philanthropic capital in the vehicle, and they all do much more than putting money into the fund. They're bringing their expertise, their network. They're giving us the credibility that I don't have to know what innovation is promising and how do we get it to the clinic. And so that really has been our superpower, this combination of foundations coming together and all acknowledging that funding basic science is crucial, but we also need to do the step after that, which is to activate this research. And the way to do that is to create companies, because we need to raise hundreds of millions for one therapy to get to the real world. And the only way to raise this kind of money is through a company. A little bit more about the model and the role we want to play in the ecosystem. This is a $40 million fund. This is not a big fund. The only way we succeed, and a big assumption we've had when we created the vehicle, was to say, if we structure that right, if we have the credibility, the knowledge, the network of those institutions, we can convince other investors, traditional private investors, life science investors, to co-invest with us. They're not going to put money in our fund. It's philanthropic. That's not what they care about. But if they can trust us, if we can become the expert investor in SEI, then we can gradually start to convince for-profit investors to also invest in those companies and give those companies a chance of success. And whether we like it or not, there's no other way. A lot of people have, talked about translation today, contrasting academia with industry. The answer is venture capital. It's startups. And the only way we do that is by engaging this venture capital industry, because they've done this over and over again in other indications. They have billions under management. They know what it takes to develop a drug, not just the scientific part, but building the team, navigating regulation, go to market. They have the relationship with pharma. So we need this industry to lean in SEI as well. And that's the role of SEI Ventures, to educate and attract those players to the field. Now, we launched the fund 2 years ago, so it is a new initiative. And we want to move very, very fast. So I stand, today, after 2 years, much more optimistic that we will get there than I was when we started. And that's for two reasons. Number one, we are starting to see actual therapies getting to people living with an SCI. Not, preclinical animal experiment. We've already invested in 8 companies, and of those 8 companies, 6 already at human stage. So, Onward got, the first FDA approval, was born out of our ecosystem and accelerated by our ecosystem. NerveGen, we hope, will be the next one to follow suit, and that could become the first FDA-approved drug, and that unlocks a lot of, value and example for all other therapies to follow. So number one, we're starting to see therapies getting to patients. Number two, serious multi-billion-dollar funds are starting to lean in. On the right-hand side here, you see logos of very large VCs, traditional for-profit investors that have trusted SEI Ventures and that are co-investing with us. Venbio, multi-billion-dollar fund, West Coast. Andera, from my country, France, very large fund as well. EQT, a big investor in Onward. Those funds, a few years ago had never touched SEI. You'd mention SEI as a population, they'd say, doesn't work, I'm not investing. They're still, not sure, right? 99% of their portfolio is not in spinal cord injury, but they are starting to invest with us. Each of them have at least one investment in SEI alongside SEI Ventures. And to me, that's a lot of hope. In 2 years, they've invested $35 million in addition to the money we've invested. So that's the kind of leverage of catalysts we need to do and to have so that eventually hundreds of millions are invested into those companies. I will not go through each of them. Those are the 8 companies we have invested in the past 2 years. All the information is on the website. I'll just say that out of 8 companies, 6 already are being used in human studies. All those investments are driven by people's priorities. So we have real therapies for spasticity, SANIA, pain, axonis, bladder, EG427, alongside innovation that's focused on the ultimate goal, which is to repair the spinal cord, so regeneration, and that would be Helix or NerveGen. Now, I wanted to, I just have 5 minutes left. Thank you. Wow, that's high tech. So I wanted to maybe use the last 5 minutes to talk about 2 companies we've invested in, just to give you a sense of our model for impact and the speed we can have and the impact we can have when we're structured right. I will start with EG427, a French company that's a gene therapy company that's targeting bladder incontinence, which we all know is a very large unmet need. I think this company is a great illustration of the power of this model. Their academic research was funded by Wings for Life. When we met them, they were stuck preclinical. They had a great data package, but they were going after bladder dysfunction, and their priority population was SCI. I can tell you not many investors were excited. We very quickly, we did a lot of work, but we realized that this held the promise of becoming the new standard of care. The data was very compelling. The team is excellent. We decided to invest $2 million. But $2 million is not enough, right? To start a clinical trial, you need at least 20, 30 million, and that's just to start the trial, right? So we went to Andera, a big fund in France, and we spent a lot of months sharing our diligence, explaining what we saw in this therapy and why this was such a big unmet need. And as a result, a potentially large commercial opportunity for them. They ended up investing 10 million. And because they invested 10 million, the French Public Investment Bank invested another 10 million. And because those big investors put money in, the early stage investors who had stopped investing in the company decided to follow on. And suddenly we had 27 million catalyzed for the company. And that meant the company was able to start the clinical trial and to move past the preclinical stage. And so they started last year trials here in the US. And all of this data is public. After 6 months, at a very low dose, close to 90% reduction in incontinence. Almost no more incontinence episodes with no side effect. That, to me, is the power of venture capital. It's an innovation that was stuck preclinically, and thanks to this model, is now in the clinic and is maybe 3-4 years away from becoming a commercially available therapy for everyone. Second example, I just have 2 minutes left, so I will try to go a bit faster. But I also want to talk about Helix. I think it's important because that's preparing the future, and that's also an example of what this kind of investment vehicle can bring to the ecosystem. Helix is an AI drug discovery company based in Cambridge in the UK. They focus on neglected conditions and rare conditions. They started with NF1, which is a rare form of cancer. And in 4 years, and with 5 million, they went from discovery to phase 2. They now have an asset that is in the clinic phase 2. And that took them less than 5 million. And that's the power of using technology to find drugs that you can repurpose to go much faster to the clinic, rather than going through the traditional slow and expensive discovery process. And so we reached out to them, we invested 2 million, and we created a program for SCI. So if you go on the website now, and you look at their pipeline, they're now actively working on spinal cord regeneration, and they're using their technology to find new mechanisms of action and to find drugs that could be repurposed to regenerate the spinal cord in chronic SCI. And in fact, some people in this room, Phil Horner, for example, is working on this project with us. So that's a second example. The first one was, how do we nudge innovation that's stuck? EG427. The second is, how do we attract the latest wave of technology to benefit people living with SCI? And that's Helix. I'm not going to spend time on the team. I will just say It's obviously, there are a lot of very smart people around me. It's not just me. Far from that, we have people like Roman, Karen, who have this combination of, scientific background, PhD from Oxford, Cambridge, and business background. And that is what we need to have. We need to have people that know and understand the indication, but also have the business background to make sound investment decisions. We have people with lived experience in the investment committee, somebody like Fotis, who was a top investment banker and lives with tetraplegia, is a crucial part of every investment decision we make. Obviously, we're guided by science. We put together a scientific advisory board from day one. And I will just say that we're very lucky to have those people working with us because they bring different perspective. We have people with cell therapy expertise, gene therapy, rehabilitation, clinical expertise, and it's very important to have all of those voices around the table when we look at potential investments. Last thoughts, and I'm on time. That is the last slide, but I think it's very important to give you the big picture. This is not a model that we invented with the Christopher Reeve Foundation and Wings, etc. It is a model that has been very successful in other indications, and we're replicating this model to make a difference in SCI. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation acknowledged the same problem in 1999. Great academic research, no translation. They created a 40 million fund. One of their investment was acquired by Vertex and returned $3 billion to the foundation. So now they have $3 billion and they can get the job done because they have the resources to find a cure. The Type 1 Diabetes Fund, it's 10 million people. It's a smaller population size than SCI. Same story, they started with 40 million. Now it's a $250 million fund. They've attracted $1 billion to the fight against juvenile diabetes from other investors. And they got, 3 years ago, the first FDA-approved drug in juvenile diabetes. It's not a cure yet, but it is disease-modifying, and it's the first one that emerged from the work that the T1D Fund did. And so that's what SCI Ventures wants to do. We want to activate this market. We want to see more companies work on spinal cord, and eventually want to make sure that the best innovation always has a path to the clinic. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrien. Now many of you know Sasha Rabchevsky, Dr. Sasha Rabchevsky from the University of Kentucky, and also one of our board members and also a good friend. Please welcome Sasha.
Oh, I've got a lapel, sorry. Hi, it's nice to see everybody here. I'll be honest with you, it still kind of gives me goosebumps to know that what Kim had said before about she and I being the only ones in the audience, to see how many of my brothers and sisters are out here facing the similar challenges. It really does, it's a testament to what this kind of meeting does for the whole field. And in particular, I'm going to be talking from a scientific point of view of us to be able to talk with people with lived experience and express our reservations and our uncertainties ourselves. I'm at the University of Kentucky. I've been there for quite a bit of time. I did my postdoc in Paris, France, and came to Kentucky. Why? Because they have a spinal cord injury and brain injury research trust, spinal cord head injury research trust, that has state monies that are set aside for investigators that don't necessarily have grants from the NIH to be able to start their research projects and get a kickstart. And that is both the University of Kentucky as well as the University of Louisville. We compete on that. And that's how I came to Kentucky. There's a lot of things that I could talk about today, but what I'm going to do is kind of give a retrospective from my personal standpoint of view of being in a clinical trial, being a researcher, and as well as an active advocate. Next slide, please. Oh, do I have it? No, yeah. So let's just jump into it. We've been talking about the decade of disruption. Kim Anderson was there. A lot of people from the NASCIC organization, North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium, were there. I was not present. I had secondary complications for spinal cord injury. Sound familiar? Okay. So when I was at this, I was there virtually. I was on there talking like, the Wizard of Oz, zooming in and giving my opinions. But the basic premise for this meeting was of disruption. And obviously, we all know that Lynn is responsible for that. Thank you, Lynn. Let's move next slide ahead, please. The one thing that came out of this meeting, as many people kind of recall, was a controversy. there was quite a bit of people in the audience, in particular the scientist community, who were very upset, in particular at Barry Monroe, at basically saying that we were misguided in our research, that the scientific people were failing us. We weren't doing the right priority kinds of research. And Vance Lemon had written up a nice little summary article about this. Next, please advance. And the way he had done it, what he had come up and summarized, there was more, but basically 4 principal things. We need to, if we're going to have a shift in the way things are done, we need dramatic changes in strategies and tactics. We need to use maybe contract resource organizations, like DPI was represented here. Do we do that? And from the very beginning when we find robust therapies. Angel investors. Does that sound familiar? What's happening here? We just had a talk, which I couldn't have even fathomed 3 or 4 years ago, okay? The NCATS modeling of funding translation is something else that he had proposed to use. I'm not proposing these. These are already stated facts. These aren't my opinions, so to speak, but this is where we were. Next slide, please. So if we skip forward a couple years, there was a International Spinal Neuroregeneration Symposium in Skamania Lodge in Washington, state of Washington, in which there were lots of themes and topics, but one of the last ones was this number 5, how can we fix science? Well, again, this was a bunch of scientists, sort of regeneration specialists, asking themselves, what's wrong with the system? How come we can't reproduce that we've been hearing about? Why is it that, well, you can blame funding mechanisms, you can blame the fact that we can't replicate, the translation gap that we've talked about this valley, and then also something that Matthew and I kind of go back and forth that he's announced is NIH fetish for mechanism. Right? If you can't get it to work and we don't exactly know how it works, we're not going to do it because it's just too risky. We're not going to even fund you to find out. So that was, a lot of it was discussed. Nothing was actually come to consensus. Next slide, please. So if we go forth just a couple months later, this came out as a commentary. But basically what it was actually doing, and what I've been saying for quite some time because of the paper mills that we have now and publication mills, is that why are we allowing the editors and editorial boards and things to publish stuff that we think necessarily are hype, and moreover that they're not being able to be reproduced? We constantly hear about this, yet what do? Well, we just keep pumping in until somebody says, well, you know what, they've done enough changes and we're going to accept the manuscript. Then when we do it in Journal Club, we tear it apart. Like, how did this thing get published? You tell your students, well, you know, that's science, and sometimes, well, whether it's nepotism or what have you, we have an endemic problem within the system of peer evaluation. Next, please. So I'm going to skip back to somebody who, again, I could not attend because of a spinal cord-related condition, was the U2FP in Atlanta, in which Dr. Kent New, who is a gifted neurosurgeon, who had a spinal cord injury. He's now quadriplegic. And he gave a talk, and he still practices lots of research and advocacy in the spinal cord research field, but he's no longer practicing as one could imagine. Well, let's go through, Sydney. I'll have to apologize because what I did is I didn't see his talk, so I took these screenshots from his webcast that is available, by the way, on U2FP's past seminar series. So what does it take to develop new treatments, what Ken said. Next slide, please. So what he did, and I apologize for the blurriness against from the screen, but basically you could say that his first dig and stab was at basic science research and preclinical research. I'm not going to go down a list of things if you can read them, but basically it's things that we've already kind of discussed about. No repetition, there's not robustness, you have to go to higher species of animals. The list goes on, but this is, again, coming from Ken, not from me necessarily, but when I heard this and I was watching this, I actually immediately reached out to Ken. We've been Zooming on a regular basis since because we spoke the same language. I'm not a clinician, but I've been through the clinical field. I've been through the ups and downs, and we were very, very simpatico when it came to why are we doing a lot of redundant stuff that I've done in the past, that he's done in the past, in animal models when we have human conditions that we could be studying. Next slide, please. So he then went through and he discussed, I'm not going to go into it, you can read yourself, this whole valley of death that we've heard of several times. And that it keeps leading us to this spot where we don't quite translate to it. And that we haven't necessarily even answered it today, but we've had lots of ideas how we might be able to approach this. Next slide, please. So what he said, which I think is bold, is he actually gave out some numbers. We should give 10% more funding to be spent on reproducing basic studies. Well, we already heard a little bit about reproduction of studies, what a quagmire that is. And even if you were to invest more money in preclinical researchers, chances are you're not going to get repetition for reasons that are still unexactly known because we have different variables. The other thing he suggested was 10% of more funding should be the development of facilities for larger animals, pig models and things of this nature, so that we can scale up to do more translation. Thirdly, academic institutions need to facilitate early ventures into this valley of death. So, and again, I don't have examples. These are his terms. I'm just reading them out. And then lastly, the FDA needs to return its roots in starting grant provisional approval based on safety with little or no, he says, emphasis on efficacy, especially for diseases with conditions that have no treatment, which is ours. Next, please. So, jumping forward to the wonderful presentation that Adrien had just presented. SCI is an investable and it is treatable. If you'd have told me this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have thought you were, I dare to say, I'm invoking him, but wise young on his curecast promising us 15 years of a cure, okay? That's what my existence has been for almost 40 years, hearing these repeated things that you've heard before. But what it does is that he's listed there the challenges that we face. Well, obviously, we've seen the examples of what the results are. Now, how then can we take all this information and bitching and things that we've talked about, how can we move forward? Next slide, please. So let's go back for a second and just from a personal philosophy and Jen Doolan's incredible study that I was fortunate enough to be a co-author on. And if you notice here, next slide, next advance, if you notice on there, the dots, I don't know if they're color-coded, but what you see there is almost $250 million are being spent on movement and mobility. And as Kim and I have discussed since 2002 and 2004, look at what's happening when you combine the pain, bowel, bladder, pressure ulcers, and that's not even an autonomic dysreflexia in there, by the way. You're talking half the budget. Now, one thing I remember years ago when Kim had published this study of asking people with spinal cord injury, there was actually quite a bit of flack back from the spinal cord injury community say, hey, we don't want democratically decided decisions about what would cover. We want it all. And we get it. But her study was their words, their input. And what they basically showed was that while they were sitting around waiting for a cure, if you're going to ask us for priorities, we'd rather not necessarily have to walk. We want to get our hand functions back if we're quadriplegics, obviously for independence. But then if we want to live a life of normality, we want to be able to poop, pee, sex, those things that we, in term autonomic, secondary outcome measures. Next slide, please. And so here we go. Here it comes up again. Scientists are doing it wrong. And I don't know if you all remember, but Barry said it. We're dying here, guys. And that's what I think really upset a lot of people in the audience when he said that. Because what he was saying wasn't like we're dying now. But I will tell you that we have friends, and Kim has talked about it, who are dying in our presence and our time, and they are contemporaries. In other words, they're not much older than, I don't know very many people with spinal cord injury, especially cervical, that are over 70 years old. I just don't see them, and I see a lot of people with spinal cord injuries. So why does that happen? It's because the system that we've talked about is broken. We don't have the individualistic, we don't have the individual patient-oriented, patient-guided. You get thrown into a pool, okay, and it's basically survival and patient self-advocacy. And I've gone through recent hospitalizations, and I'm telling you that's why I've come to a revision. We need to change things about where we're taking care of people before we try any therapies. Next slide, please. So, hope, optimism, trust. Those are really, really dicey words, especially about what your incentivization is. We've talked about this quite a bit of time. Now, I have this kind of like a Christmas tree looking thing, but the very bottom is, what are we delivering to people in a laboratory or even to those living with spinal cord people? Well, look at all the things that we have to hurdle. Data, that's a motivation of a student, incentivization. Manuscripts, that's a PI. Lab space, grants, academic institutes, hospital administrations, FDA, NIH, CROs that are taking care of trial costs. And again, those are all the incentivizations. We don't necessarily have a plan, but this is what we're trying to make clear, is that it's not going to take one of these branches. It's all these silos have to work together. So how does that happen? Well, you know what? It is happening for me, what I'm seeing here. And it's because, I'm telling you, I joined this organization back in 2017 when I went to my first Working to Walk, not to go to the meeting, but to actually go because that's when they started the North American Spinal Consortium. And North American Spinal Cord Injury Consortium, and Kim and Jen French, who are very good friends, and they say, we need a spinal cord injury legitimizer, right? So I kind of went there, but what I did was I fell in love with Unite to Fight. I met Matthew. Matthew was asking questions, and so were others like Kate Willett, of questions of these PIs that I revered for years. They were asking them questions I've been wanting to ask, but feared for my career, okay? Not necessarily a career, but like getting off the track, maybe not getting a grant because I pissed them off. Those are kinds of things that are really, really, really deep down. Next slide, please. So I've got a list of things here that I just want to kind of get off my chest. First of all, since 2002, 2000, when I walked on stage, and I'll show you in a second, and Kim made her seminal study, we really have not deviated from our individual lanes. We get trained by certain people. We keep up those training capacities. We treat our students to do those, yet we keep in our lanes, research lanes. Next slide, please. Next advance. There is an undeclared disability tax. I take that term actually from Harkness, William Harkness. He's actually a blind advocate, but he terms it a disability tax. It's unwritten because of the skyrocketing medical costs that we have here, but offers and treatments for new therapies are non-existent. So there is an urgency for us to keep, as Kim said, people alive so they can participate in studies, so they can have a normal life. Next slide, please. SCI accelerates aging. In this last year, I have lost 4 very good friends. 2 of them younger than me, and 2 of them older than me, with spinal cord injury. And it blew me away because the reason why they died wasn't because of the spinal cord injury, it was because of pressure sores. They went in for shoulder surgery and never got out of the hospital, and they had got pneumonia or sepsis. You go into the ER, and it's happened to me, it's scary because there is no safety net. There is no guidance. You're by yourself. And if you are by yourself, which I was, how do you get out of it? I did. I'm here to preach that there's a lot of people who can't. I did. Matthew says, I win at spinal cord injury. I'm doing things correctly, but I almost died. Okay? Now, what if it had been that I wasn't at this meeting, I couldn't have given these kinds of discussions and talks. I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture here or even get you to cry. I'm here to say it's a reality. It is true and it's happening. And if I wouldn't be here, I dare say my name would be brought up and we'd be having a memoriam, okay? All right, next slide, please. So back in 2002, I underwent an intervention that Jen French and Kim Anderson subsequently underwent to put electronic electrodes using functional electrical stimulation. As you can see there, I got up and walked on stage in front of all my peers back in 2002, walking and then sitting down. And what did I talk to them about? Did I talk to them about my implants? No. Next slide, please. What I did was I talked to them about the very thing we're discussing now. I said, when I got these implants, it's a bitch. I had to do a lot of work. It was hard. There were secondary complications. I had to go into therapy 5:30 every damn day for 4 weeks just to get the implants. All that stuff that doesn't even get said, okay? So when I sat up on the stage, I told our peers, slow down with the walking stuff. Let's start concentrating. How do you know when we do an animal didn't do well in a BBB? Did he pee better? Did she pee better? Did she have autonomic disorder? Well, obviously, at that time, as Naomi said, people really didn't even know that term. Next slide. And we're coming to an end right here. So like Ken knew, again, this is just a low-hanging fruit. Might we propose a more equitable funding system for spinal cord injury-centric RFAs where they target bowel, bladder, cardiovascular pain, like by the way, Nielsen Foundation did this, okay? And breathing dysfunction to promote functional independence and less medical dependence. So next, so how do we get there? How do we get there? Next slide. Science, myself included, need to break their silence and do what you all are doing here today. Get involved in advocacy. Don't be on the top of the pinnacle. Don't pretend your shit don't stink, okay? I'm not joking. This is ridiculous because I've seen it go through. We go through grants, like I said, that we can tear apart, and yet we're wondering how did they get passed. So next slide. These are the last, I will not do this, you can read them yourselves. These are the particular reasons why and how it is that science needs to get out and be exposed a little bit more, to be able to talk to somebody in an elevator about what you're doing. Okay, get your 2-minute elevator pitch and ask, why am I asking for money? John Gensel and I were talking, he's the director. We have a donation button on our Spinal Cord Center site. And I'm like, what are they donating to? Just because you got a donation button doesn't mean, what are you delivering? And that makes us think ourselves, like, wow, we are. Is it to the institute that we need money, or is it to the cause? Next slide, please. So I'll end it with there, because one of my favorite, people in my life who's post-mortem is Bob Marley. But this was the expression, when I had a quadriplegic roommate when I was in rehab, he taught me, because he was on a trachea, of how much we take for granted and what we need to do better, and there's always people that are worse off. So I've taken that mantra to say, I've had a lot of hardship, but every time I go along the way, whether it's doing it with a nonprofit, I bring other people along. I don't say it's for me. I don't say it's for just a university. I bring other people along because that empowers people. When you give them ability like you all are here now, I had to go through a lot of stuff to get into a room like this with these kind of scientists. You guys have the ability now because we've broken those barriers. So I'll end it there, and thank you for your attention.
Jason, Adrien, David, come on back up, please. And Noam has a question. If we could have some, thank you. Anne.
First of all, that was just an incredible session. Really, what a great way to end it. I had not heard of SCI Ventures, which is just phenomenal. But a lot of what we've discussed so far is about money, and it's come up. What does industry care about? It's money. What do insurance companies care about? Denying care so they can make money. What do patients care about? It's paying their bills and fighting the insurance companies. What do academic institutions care about the most? What's the difference? Absolutely, they care about money by far as well. And so it's just as important for academic institutions, and they get their money from granting organizations. And I'm just trying to make a suggestion. This is absolutely not a blame game, but the NIH has led the way in so many great things, including open access publications, common data elements, genome project, et cetera. It's the biggest funder for research at academic institutions. And can we go more into these things that are not considered novel? More rehab, more infrastructure, more biosamples, more data sharing. Those are things that wouldn't be considered novel, and yet every time we write a grant or every time we review a grant, you have to have a novelty section, and you get dinged if your grant isn't considered novel. So, unless SCI Ventures completely blows the lid off our pot of money, we're gonna can we consider redistributing money in a way that doesn't only incentivize novelty and maybe incentivize some of these less sexy things that have been discussed today? Reproducibility, implementation, and just plain old rehabilitation. Thank you.
Wow.
West.
All right.
Wait,
No?
let
Okay.
these guys, no comment?
You want to comment? Adrien?
I guess you meant. Okay. Can you hear me? No.
There's a button on the bottom part.
No. Still no.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Found the button. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know why I'm answering this. I guess it's because you said unless SCI Ventures succeed, and so I'm supposed to say SCI Ventures is going to succeed. But I mean, I get your point. I think there are different vehicles for different purposes. I think the role of venture capital is to make bets on the next generation of innovation, because there needs to be a profit incentive for large VCs to come in. I think we're actually lucky, and a lot of people don't realize that, but the SCI unmet need is a very big unmet need. It's 20 million people, a $3 to $6 million per individual. So that's $100 billion unmet need, which means that there is space for multiple billion-dollar companies to be created. And so that's the advantage we have. That's why I think SCI is investable. And so I think that's the role of venture capital, to nudge this innovation. Now, I agree with you. Other institutions should focus on other enablers that are also important, and it's not either or. In fact, if you look at what the Christopher Reeve Foundation has been doing, for example, setting up a CRO with standardized model, so that innovation can use the same CRO with the same model, so we can compare experiments with the Strive initiative, that is extremely important, that benefits companies we invest in, and that benefits other teams as well.
Okay.
West.
I was having a conversation with Darrow Music at the Craig Nielsen Foundation, and he told me about the Swiss Paraplegic Foundation. And so the question I have basically is, have you heard about the Swiss Paraplegic Foundation? And then secondly, for the audience that doesn't know about it, basically, if you're a Swiss and you pay $50 a year, 50 francs a year, you are enrolled in a risk pool, and if you have a spinal cord injury, you're entitled $250,000 of cash payout for whatever you might need, in addition to what their foundation funds, which is hospitals and rehabs and voc rehab and all this other stuff. And that just blew my mind. $50 a year. I paid, I don't know what I pay for Amazon Prime. People will, and I know people in Oregon that pay for Life Flight. They pay $150 a year for a membership to Life Flight in case they're out skiing or hiking and they break a leg. So the question is, like, there are other mechanisms to raise capital to fund less sexy quality of life treatments for people with spinal cord injury. And I think it'd be, like, when you were talking, Adrien, I was like, wow, that bringing those foundations or those people together is pretty incredible. And what if we could replicate the Swiss Paraplegic Foundation in the United States? So there's a question in there somewhere.
What if?
That'd be great.
Well,
Chris,
sorry, go ahead.
Kristen?
Do they want to respond to that one?
Hello? Nope. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think. No, I got it. I think that it's a catch-22, because if you're going to say that you want money for the rehab component, which is crucial and needed, that also means that, well, we're going to have to sacrifice money elsewhere to fund that. And I'm being very naive about this. That's just how I'm assuming the pot works. And so again, if you focus it and you say, from now on, we're going to be putting more money towards actual care and PM&R and things of that nature, I would venture to say that a lot of the PIs, principal PIs here, preclinical, would not be happy because it's probably going to be less money for that. I don't know. But here's where I would advise discussions, is that folks like yourself get in touch with Adrien. I mean, right? We don't know how that works. I don't know how he operates. I don't know how you operate. But this is where the discussions come about. How could I even get my foot in the door in the venture capital to be doing something other than finding a cure? Sure. Can somebody give him a mic, please?
Sorry about that, but like, I think about high school sports, and it's a media campaign. You know, it's a little bit like, how are we going to give out $250,000 to each person that has a spinal cord injury when we don't have the money? Well, if you have, 200 million people in the United States that are willing to pay $50 a year for this, it starts to add up. And then you think about high school and high school sports and school districts that require parents to pay $200 a year or whatever it is, 4 years for their student to play football because they prevent. It's a risk pool, right? There are ways to kind of add to that pool, and I don't think it is either or. If it could be both. As Adrien is saying, like, there's money that goes towards research, and then there's money for quality of life. And I'm not challenging anything that you guys are saying. It's just such an innovative and tantalizing idea to me, and it feels like bringing people together to think about how do we make this happen in the United States.
But that's good that you're bringing this up because we don't think that way.
Well,
That's what this. Go ahead.
And as a quick response, I mean, it's the problem of, it sounds like it's an insurance policy or a pool or something like that, but who thinks they're going to get a spinal cord injury? Like, that's the problem, and it's one of the messages we try to tell people, is that this is a very, very open enrollment condition, right? But people don't think about that. And it's one of the things we try to jam into legislators and lawmakers' heads is, and we're going to be wearing these shirts that are going to shove that right in their face tomorrow. I hope the lime green shirts are here, but
They are.
yeah, I mean, it's a reminder. All of this can happen to you in an instant. So, I mean, I think it'd be cool, but I don't know, prior to myself getting injured, I don't know if I would have done the $50 a month to do it, but it sounds like a great idea if it came along with the idea that, this could happen to you in an instant.
Well, and the intersection of that too is what we're going to do tomorrow, which I think is what you're saying, is that already exists in a sense. And Alzheimer's Association, Rachel, to say that that was an effective lobbying campaign to sort of, that's a social contract question. We live in a society. In this society, people get spinal cord injury. What are we going to do about it? And is it fairly appropriated relative to the cost that we as a society pay for that, in all the ways that we pay for that? And that goes for every other condition and every other social problem. And in a sense, like high school football, Wes, that you brought up, like to me, it's crazy that in this country you have towns having, raising funds for Pee Wee leagues. Like, this is the wealthiest nation on the planet. Why do we not have appropriate spending?
Matthew, it could be an opportunity for next year's conference to have some insurance people here.
Sure. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you guys for the wonderful presentations. I have a question first for Adrien, but then another kind of related question for the broader panel. Adrien, my name's Henry. I know we talked. I look up to you in many ways. 3 years ago, my younger brother was also paralyzed, and I pivoted my academic and professional career into biopharma market access to prepare for what you're facilitating in the Catalyst vehicle that you are driving. I hope to come in once these drugs are starting to get approved and help them get to market and to patients. I have a question about that. I understand that you've raised $40 million, which is a wonderful feat. However, I see that your biggest check sizes are around $2 million, and you're still able to catalyze some follow-on capital from outside investments in for-profit vehicles. I'm curious, especially from our conversations, what would it mean for SCI Ventures to get to that $100 million fund in terms of how much you can actually put in from a check size perspective, but also what that means to raise follow-on capital from those big VCs? That's my first question. My second question, I'll do a sub-question as well. And what can the people in this room do to help you get there? That's one. My second question is I understand you're a global-focused venture arm. How are you coordinating across ex-US and US clinical trials, clinical research, to ensure that access is available for US peoples living with spinal cord injury? So twofold question. One, how can you get to the 100 million mark? What does that do to you? How can we help? And two, how are you coordinating this global innovation?
Yeah, I'll start with the second one. It's the easiest. So first of all, yes, you're right, we're global. So our mandate is to find the best innovation wherever it is. And so right now, if you look at our portfolio, it's roughly half US companies, half European companies, and I include the UK in Europe. And we've been looking at companies in South Korea and Japan. So we're really trying to find the best and the most investable companies working on spinal cord. In terms of US access, usually those companies will start with the US market anyway. So that's the biggest market, and so that's what makes the most sense. And once you get approved in the US, then it's very easy to be approved in Europe, and it doesn't work the same way the other way around. So if you start in Europe, you don't have automatic approval in the US. You have to restart or redo trials, and it's very expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So usually, whether you're a European company or anywhere in the world, you're trying to get access to the US market first. And so EG is a good example. It's a French company, but their trial is in the US because that's what makes the most business sense. So that's the second point. On the first point, yes, I think after 2 years, we're much more optimistic now with the quality of companies we're seeing. We're optimistic because we're seeing two things. We're seeing companies that are not historically working on spinal cord injury, but that are keen to add an SCI program if we invest. And I think that's where the biggest opportunity is for us, is to also attract the best teams, the best technology from adjacent neuro conditions, MS, ALS, stroke, TBI, etc. And so to do that, we need to invest big tickets. What we've done with Helix is largely because of my network and connection with the company, but we need to find ways to make this much more scalable and repeatable. And to do that, to have more influence, we need to be able to invest bigger tickets. Because obviously, if we invest 5-7 million, we're a big investor, we're more credible, it's much easier to attract more money, and it's much easier to take a board seat, influence the company, ensure that they keep working on spinal cord injury, which is not the easiest indication, but make sure they stay on track. So to get to this kind of ticket size, we're going to have to raise more capital. Right now, we have 40 million. We want to build a portfolio of 20 companies, so the ticket size is relatively small. It's 1, 2, 3 million maximum. So we're going to have to raise more. My experience raising philanthropic capital is that I admire the people in the room who are doing that. I know many people in the room have been doing this. This is new to me, and it's very, very difficult. Raising 40 million was difficult. Took me more than a year. I think it was too slow. Some people say, great, it's a lot of money in 1 year. I think it's too slow, and it's also very clear that we're not going to get to 100 million with philanthropy alone. And so eventually, I think, because we're proving that the field is investable, we're thinking of other ways to attract not just philanthropists, which we're hopeful to continue to get the support of, but also investors who are mission-driven, impact investors, people who care about investing with a purpose, because that's a much bigger pool of capital. They can be connected to SCI, but maybe not as directly, and they care. Maybe they're happy with a slightly lower return as long as there's an important mission. And so I think we're going to have to expand the pool of available capital for SCI, and I think impact investors will be the next step.
I have a question about translation of research in the short term and research that potentially isn't marketable, right? So there's a lot of important things we need to do right now to help patients, and we don't have companies, we don't plan to set up companies. The current funding climate's very tight. I'm wondering what creative solutions we have in the meantime to get some of these projects launched, right? Like for me, the best and most reliable source of funds currently is grateful patients who are benefactors to our institution. And that's just completely, it's not a plan, it just lands, right? It just comes from the sky. So to Sasha's point about these investigator-initiated trials with the NIH, there aren't enough. It's competitive. We're fighting with each other for the same money. What do we do while we're waiting for these? Should we all spin off a company and start looking for support from your venture capital firm or what? I mean, what do David and Sasha have? Do you have thoughts off the top of your head what we do now, aside from continuing to just 6 grants a year, try to get these things funded? Sorry, David.
I'm not sure my microphone is working, but sorry, I can't respond. I have a lot of thoughts about this because I spend so much time thinking about it, and I am not above trickery, and so that's my plan right now is to really, I think that the market is perfectly viable, and I think that's just a false narrative that, companies have fought back against us, particularly talking about neurostim. They had this impression about SCI, but I think, despite the fact that we've had these hiccups with NIH, I feel like companies are coming around right now. And in a way, it's very similar to sort of how, you guys are, leveraging each other to move forward on the VC side. Onward and everything moving forward is helping me to, pitch this much more directly. And the feedback I'm getting now is that people are interested and they want to move forward. The real problem I think that we have facing us is on the regulatory side. And I agree with Sasha, what Kent and you guys have discussed, that we're in a circular problem with SCI because we don't have any outcomes that have been validated against interventions that work. We have outcomes that are validated against the natural history and cohort studies of spinal cord injury. But we do not have outcomes that are really validated in any way to be measured with intervention. There's no data. And so no matter what argument you craft and you go to the FDA, the response is always the same. The history of spinal cord injury measurement is, let's do the INSCI, or a very, very, very narrow outcome. And so that's really our challenge. I think that, from a commercialization point of view, not being someone that's running a company or interested in that, I think that there's an avenue, that's emerging right now that I think we're going to be able to get more industry funding for. And that, maybe that's wrong, and gosh, things can change pretty quickly these days, but that's what I'm seeing right now, and that's at least the tactic I'm taking. Otherwise, we're left with, philanthropy, and, I'm not above begging, I can beg like anybody else. And then NIH, and I think we can look at NIH in maybe a different light, and maybe this is something we can galvanize together as a community. NIH has changed how it's structured grant reviews, and maybe we just need to, optimize how we're thinking about, what we all talk about, which is significance. Now, it's all about significance. So how do we make SCI the most significant thing that's crossing the desk of reviewers at NIH? And I think that is also doable, and maybe we can, pull resources to make that just crystal clear on every grant. I don't know.
I'm going to take a quick one.
Well,
can I add? Because I want to add to it.
Sure.
Just to thicken the question. And it also came from the live stream, which we haven't had any of those, so I want to honor people that are watching. From Nancy, I think Nancy Nicholas. Sasha and David, how do we incentivize scientists to do high quality research and work with people like Adrien so that we can bring therapies to patients? So Sasha can weave that into your answer.
Wow, that was not where I was going.
No, damn it.
Starting dialogue. What is the problem? We don't have solutions, but if we've identified the problems and we have the resources, that's where the merger comes. What I was going to say, and I'm going to say it now. When I met David through Matthew years ago, Susie Harkema and her work was the leading edge. That was it. David, as a resident, took a chance, huge chance, that I don't think anybody here really truly appreciates. I do. To go off and try something brand new. It could have worked, it could have not have. Guess what? It's working. Now, is it working to make people foot a stare? Is it making people do? No, but it's a starting point where we're getting results. So the question is, from the audience, how do we get this? Is dialogue like this. There's no other way. And it's following up with team meetings. Like Jason said, we have bi-weekly meetings with organizations that typically don't talk. It's not because they don't want to talk, it's because there's no overhead, there's no oversight, there's no unifying principle. I'm not saying that Unite to Fight or REEVE are it, but without the organizations like this, I don't think we'd be in this room, okay? Because we all have our silos, we all have our incentives that I was talking about, right? When is he gonna finish? Because I want to go drink. Okay, everybody has their own kind of incentivizations, is what their attention spans are. I'm saying it's a long haul, and what David did years ago is now, now we're questioning how much more can we, not if we can't, how much more can we indicate it for? How can we get it to other states? So anyway, I'll end it on that.
Jesse.
Yeah, I just had a quick question for David, actually. Technical question on the study that you did. The quick takeaway that I'm getting there is that low frequency hits the muscles, high frequency is sensation. And if that's the case, it seems like that would have been known 20 years ago when you guys were all studying on this. So just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. That message, my message is not coming across perfectly clearly, and it's primarily because it's like hot off the press in that sense. It's actually not that there's nothing wrong with low or high frequency, and it's not for one or the other. What I'm saying is that the signals that we're now using in the pain world and recording from the spinal cord, when you look at it through that frequency lens, tells us that that signal is not a good representation for pain or for sensation. But it is seemingly, so far, early days, a good representation of motor activation. And that's weird, right? That's a weird thing. It's like, it's kind of like you throw a rock in a pond, and instead of like, seeing, how cold the water is, you figure out that it tells you about the fish that are in the water. Like, it's weird, right? It's weird that that's the case, but that weirdness is what I like, because it tells us something about the mechanism and how that sensory system is linked to the motor system that is in many ways aligning with what people are seeing in the animal world. It's like, oh, okay, there's this gate that it's passing through, and that gate requires this kind of energy at these frequencies. But it's not like a good or a bad, low and high frequency. It's just that when you evaluate across the frequencies, you get this weird view of it. You could use, for example, high frequencies to be very selective on which muscles, and you could use low frequencies to hit a bunch of muscles. Like, so you could use it in many different ways, and that's where I think we're going to go with it. But just to clarify that, yeah.
Patricia.
Hi, Jason. I want to thank you for starting singing Imagine All the People. This isn't really a question. It reminded me of something that's very, very core to our mission. When Kim talked this morning, she talked about the hundreds of thousands of people who were not in this room. And then later, when Kamalo was talking about who qualifies for treatments, he mentioned the critical economic disparity that happens. I take hundreds of phone calls from people all over the world, desperate phone calls. And let me share one that haunts me. It was a 19-year-old young man from Newark, New Jersey, who was doing what 19-year-old kids do in New Jersey. He was down at the shore swimming and diving and was spinal cord injured. When he was released from the hospital, the fire department brought him back to his public housing. They carried him and his wheelchair up 4 flights of stairs, 4 floors, because there's no elevator in his building. And they left him there. That reminds me of 2 things. One, everybody in this room has a voice. But if you do the quick calculations, we each represent about 1,000 people who have no voice. So when you're arguing with the insurance company or speaking to a congressman or pleading with a donor, remember, you're speaking for 1,000 people who have no voice. The other thing it reminds me of is our theme here is we're going to get here together. And if we're going to get here together, we have to make sure that we leave nobody behind. Thank you.
Really quick here. Is this thing on? Hold on. It's on, isn't it?
Yep.
Hello. I got two. I'm in stereo. I wanted to answer a question I heard from the audience. It said, Jason, I think I heard this from the audience. They said, Jason, you were talking about like seeing hope for a future of us getting there together, but you talked a lot about these cool advocates that are doing all this stuff, but where are you seeing with the hope with the advocacy organizations? I don't know why I totally left this out, because it was the main purpose of this whole talk that I gave, was that the most encouraging thing that has happened for me since I've been in this advocacy work was that thing that I dreamed about in 2019 when I saw all those logos, and we had this urgent opportunity when we lost the spinal cord injury research program. And I got so mad and angry about it, and I was talking to Matthew, and I was like, man, this is terrible. Like, this is where we need to get everybody here. So Matthew emailed many organizations. But I just wanted to tell you that the organizations that showed up to the table that made this thing happen and continued to meet on this bi-monthly basis, for me was like, what's it called? Like not a completion of a dream or something, but
Fulfillment.
what is it called?
Fulfillment.
Thank you. It was fulfillment of something that I dreamed that would happen in 2019. Now, granted, it was just a small project, but it was so cool to see, PVA and Reeve and United Spinal and Craig H. Nielsen and Craig Hospital and Shepherd Center and NASCIC, and I know I'm missing other people, but this group of people who said, they came together and they said, we care about this thing and we're gonna send out calls to action and we're gonna make it happen. So anyhow, for those who asked that, I actually didn't hear, that's your answer, and thank you, and thank all you organizations that did that as well, so.
Sorry, John. I'm sorry, Ryan. Everybody who else had a question, I think we got to leave it there. We're 10 minutes over as it is. Quick message for those on the live stream. We are leaving you now because the rest of the day will not be filmed. And those of you who are going to the Capitol, stay here. We'll come back here after the break. The rest of you, you're welcome to stay if you'd like. But the remainder of the day are the teams that are going to the Capitol tomorrow to talk through our logistics and the scheduled meetings and get into our teams. We've got the T-shirts coming in. We have our Leave Behind folders, and we're going to talk all logistics and get ready for that. Having said all that, I think, Patricia, your comment, and Jason, your comment together as a nice bookend to this meeting, that we are here representing a lot of people, and not just in this country, but all over the world. And our hope just, all day long, actually all the time, but every time we do this meeting, it's always a hard thing for me to realize it's just a meeting. And like tomorrow, the meeting's over. But the point is what we do with what has come out of this, what we do with the conversation. Sam, Walt, and Mandy have been taking notes for the last 2 days. They are going to write a proceedings document over a period of time. Probably watch more presentations, talk amongst themselves. We want to put that out so that people can look at it, read it, distribute it, sort of publish it. I don't know that we'll publish it, journal publish it, but whatever. There are themes that have emerged here that I think are very important, and there is work to do that we started together with all the organizations that are in this room to figure out, like Rachel talked about, that national strategy. Where are we going from here? What are we doing? What kind of smart resources are we going to ask for? And what are the challenges? I had wanted Megan to comment earlier, so I just will say it, just as a thinking about the FDA, and something Kristen told me yesterday, who was here, that your challenge of getting collaborations across institutes or researchers and clinicians and people with injuries, that's a big challenge. She said, wait till you get to the FDA with combinatorial therapies. And you got to get the biological division and the pharmacological division and the device division to actually coordinate and work together. She said it's going to be harder. So we need to be together. We need to work together. We need to collaborate together so that we can get over those hurdles. So we've begun that in conversation today, and I really appreciate all of you being here and being a part of the conversation. And I'm grateful. And to those of you who are going to go to the Capitol tomorrow, hang out, we're going to talk. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And thank you all, gentlemen. You're welcome.